The greatest fear for anyone traveling by air is undoubtedly a mid-air collision with another plane. Although unlikely, the chances of such a tragedy happening are never zero. We'll be discussing one such gut-wrenching incident that happened between BAL Bashkirian Airlines Flight 2937 and DHL International Aviation ME Flight 61. It was the July of 2002, over Germany close to midnight. A Russian plane carrying children to Spain found itself on a collision course with DHL's cargo carrier. Considered to be among the worst aviation disasters of recent times, how could two planes collide over one of the most strictly regulated areas of the world? And who was to be blamed for this disaster? The city of Ufa, the capital of Bashkortostan, Russia, decided to send some of its brightest young minds on a trip near Barcelona, Spain. The trip was supposed to last 2 weeks and was organized by UNESCO. The students selected were all extremely talented individuals. Some excelled academically while others showed great athleticism. Among these children were Karim Dikdaryov and Alina Hananova. Karim, who was diagnosed with autism, was a prodigy artist and had 2 public exhibitions by the age of 14. His art showed emotion and expression, and Karim said he could feel colors. He had just cleared his 9th grade and was permitted by his parents to go on the trip as it would help him relax a bit. Alina was an excellent gymnast who won many gymnastics awards at the age of 12. Her parents were very happy that their daughter, among all the other children of Ufa, was chosen for the trip and would get to meet other people like her. All 46 children, along with 6 teachers, board a train from Ufa to Moscow, from where they would board their final flight. Call it fate, but something went wrong, and the tourist agency accidentally dropped the children at the wrong airport, causing them to miss their flight. While the agency tried sorting things out, the children went out exploring the beautiful capital. After some time, the flight got rescheduled for 2 days later, which made those kids very happy. On July 1st, the children finally boarded their flight. Accompanying them were the Kaloyevs, who were not a part of the school group. They were going on a holiday to visit their father who had just finished his work, also near Barcelona. There was a total of 5 Russian pilots flying this plane. The captain of the flight was Alexander Gross, an experienced pilot who had been flying for over 30 years. The first officer on deck was Captain Grigoriev, the airline's chief pilot. He was appointed to evaluate the captain's flight. The other people present in the cockpit were Captain Mutar, usually the first officer, a flight engineer, and a navigation expert. At 11 p.m., the Bashkirian Airlines Flight 2937 takes off from Moscow's airport's runway. The plane was a Tupolev 154. Meanwhile, DHL's cargo carrier was also getting ready to take off from Italy and was on its way to Brussels in Belgium. The plane was a Boeing 757. This plane only had 2 people, British Captain Paul Phoenix and the Canadian First Officer Brant Campione. The plane took off nearly 6 minutes after the Bashkirian Airlines plane at 11:06 p.m. Both aircraft carriers had TCAS, which is a traffic collision avoidance system that can monitor the traffic situation around the plane for a range of up to 40 miles. It reads the constant stream of radio signals sent by the aircraft's transponder, identifying them and telling its location, and calculates whether the planes are on a collision course. If the planes are headed towards each other, TCAS will not only inform but also tell the pilots what to do to avoid an accident. If air traffic control were to ever overlook the situation, TCAS would be the final line of defense. Meanwhile, at the Skyguide Area Control Center in Zurich, Switzerland, the day shift had ended and the night shift staff was taking over. It was 11:08, and among other people part of the night shift team, Peter Nielsen was the one who was left in charge of the whole operation. He was an expert controller and had been doing this job for 8 years. Now, the center's job is to regulate air traffic in southern Germany and northern Switzerland. Initially, there were 2 controllers responsible for looking over the traffic, but since the traffic wasn't too dense that day, Peter's colleague decided to take a lengthy break. Peter now had to look over both radars, which were located a few feet apart, and also monitor all the air traffic. This was just the beginning of Peter's problems. Just 3 minutes after his shift started, 2 technicians walked up to him and informed him about the work they had to do. Skyguide management had authorized work on the main radar. This meant there was going to be a delay in the screen's display. The radar system would display a 2-minute warning if 2 planes ever got too close to each other, but due to the repairs, this warning too was disabled. The worst was yet to come. Soon after, the two technicians came back to let Peter know the telephone system must be shut down as well, and the control center had to shift over to their standby phones. This caused issues in communications with the pilots and other control centers. No one thought much of it and resumed work as normal, not knowing all of this would lead to one of the greatest disasters they had ever witnessed. While all of this happened, the Tupolev 154 with its 46 children was currently over central Germany and was on its way to Switzerland. After getting clearance from the last German control center, the plane enters Switzerland from the south and is headed over to the disaster-struck Sky Guide, still entirely looked over by Peter Nielsen. At the same time, the DHL plane climbed north over the Alps and was about to enter the Swiss airspace. Wanting to save on flight costs, Captain Paul asked for clearance to fly at a higher altitude. The thinner air above resulted in less drag, hence improving fuel efficiency. The pilot asked to fly at a flight level of 360, which is an altitude of 36,000 feet, or about 10.97 kilometers, the same at which the Russian plane was flying. This was when Sky Guide permitted DHL to fly at that altitude, and both planes were now on a collision course, headed straight towards each other. But if you looked through the Sky Guide's perspective, both the planes were miles apart and flying at the same altitude, posing no threats. Back at the control center, Peter received a new flight strip from his assistant. It was an Airbus, Aero Lloyd Flight 1135 en route to the airport of Friedrichshafen. This meant Peter's workload doubled for the next 5 minutes, and he constantly had to switch from one radar screen to the other, making sure all flights reached their destination safely. The second controller was still on his break and was nowhere to be seen. Peter realized this was too much workload for one person to handle all alone and decided to call the airport control tower of Friedrichshafen. The phone service was still down. Just to be sure, Peter tried another phone, but the lines kept on failing to connect. Peter wasn't able to contact the tower and now had to look over this flight as well. During all this chaos, Aero Lloyd tried establishing contact with Sky Guide, so Peter, with no other choice, had to leave the Russian pilots. Everything so far went smoothly, as control towers were used to handling such busy scenarios. But tonight, Peter had to look over 2 screens and his equipment wasn't functioning properly. Even the collision warning detector wasn't working. The Russian airliner tried making contact with Sky Guide, but Aero Lloyd called the tower again, so Peter had to leave the Bashkirian Airlines flight unattended again. Soon after, another plane entered Sky Guide's territory. It was a Thai Airways flight and was headed north and needed Sky Guide. Peter went to hand over the Aero Lloyd's flight to the Friedrichshafen control tower. He once again tried to get in contact with them, but the lines were still down. He even asked his assistant to try ringing them through their phone, but that effort too was futile. There was no way of transferring this flight unless communication was up and running. Both planes were still headed towards each other, and the speed at which they were approaching was close to 800 meters per second. This would mean they were just merely 2.5 minutes away from colliding with each other. Both the captains were completely unaware of the situation and were headed towards the Swiss-German border. But fortunately, someone finally spotted the danger at another air traffic control in Germany. Due to safety reasons, international air traffic rules do not allow them to communicate directly with the captains, so the control tower tried to get in contact with Peter. However, they too were not able to get in touch with the tower since communications were down. Both the planes were now dangerously close. It was when the planes were 40 miles apart from each other that the TCAS finally gave its first warning. The Russian pilots saw the DHL plane on their screen. They were shocked, but more confused since they weren't told anything about this plane by the control tower. Peter was still focusing on the second screen, making sure the Aero Lloyd flight landed at its destination safely. He informed Aero Lloyd's captain about the communication issue he was having and asked them to call Friedrichshafen Airport from their second set and inform them they were 20 miles from landing. DHL's plane still hadn't been issued a warning, neither by the control tower nor by the TCAS computer. They were relaxed and the officer even went to the bathroom. The Russian pilots were getting more and more concerned as the approaching plane was getting closer and closer. Meanwhile, they still didn't know if both planes were at the same altitude or not. The navigation expert glanced at the TCAS and realized the altitude difference was only 100 meters. The flight crew was not sure what to do at this point since they were getting no info about the situation from Sky Guide. Soon after, in the DHL cockpit, TCAS detected the Russian flyer. It was dangerously close. The TCAS computer asked the DHL carrier to descend. Peter finally noticed what was about to happen. Since he hadn't been contacted by DHL's pilots, he assumed they were still on flight level 360. He asked the Russian pilots to descend fast. The Russian pilots followed his orders. The TCAS computer issued a critical warning and informed the pilot to sharp ascend. Due to the conflicting responses of both the TCAS and the control tower, they once again asked for confirmation to descend, which Peter granted them. The pilots, ignoring the TCAS's instructions, followed what was being told to them as the TCAS might have issued a false warning. Peter, who thought he had resolved the issue, moved back to the second monitor to tend the other flights. The DHL pilots tried contacting Nielsen about the TCAS warning and that they were descending, but Peter couldn't hear them. If both planes had followed the TCAS's instructions, the collision could have been avoided. However, since the Russian pilots followed Peter's orders, both planes ended up diving towards each other. The navigator shouted that the other plane was below them. Everyone in the cockpit was on the lookout, wondering where the plane might be. The captain saw lights approaching from the left. It was the DHL airliner. In a last-minute attempt to save the plane, the Russian pilots pulled up as hard as they could while the DHL pilots rushed the plane as low as they could. But it was already too late. The tail of the DHL plane went straight through the Bashkirian Airlines plane. The DHL's plane merely lost its tail, but the impact was so hard that the plane completely lost control. The pilots put up a fight for another 2 minutes, but the plane crashed 4 miles away. The Russian plane was clipped in half from the belly. Both its halves descended straight down and the pilots lost consciousness just moments after the collision. Peter, who still didn't know what just happened, slid his chair back to the radar screen and tried establishing a connection with the Russian flight. When he got no response back, he tried again, but this time took a glance at the screen. 2 planes not moving could only mean one thing. Peter slowly realized what had happened. His voice getting lower and lower, shaking and eyes in tears. He constantly shouted the carrier's name, hoping that by some miracle he would get a response. Nothing. Everything went silent. It was at this point that Peter's co-controller returned from his break. He saw what had happened and then looked at Peter. He lost control and started violently crying. He blamed himself for the death of so many innocent lives. Peter's co-controller took over the operation for the rest of the night as Peter left the control room for the last time. The wreckage was scattered over 130 square miles in Uba-Lingen on the German-Swiss border, marking the worst mid-air collision in Germany's post-war history. The debris from the crash came blazing down from the sky. The sky was orange-red flaming. We saw pieces raining down and detonations again and again. We realized it wasn't just a normal thunderstorm. It's something we've never seen before, were the words used by Stella, the founder of an orphan school around which all the debris fell, to describe what she saw that night. All the debris and the bodies had to be properly disposed of, so a police operation was called for. It was the largest the province of Baden-Württemberg had ever seen, lasting over a week and involving 6,000 people searching for the bodies. The first person to show up at the crash site was Mr. Vitaly Kaloyev, the Russian architect who eagerly awaited his family who was coming to visit from Barcelona. Although family members were not encouraged to help in the search, Vitaly just could not help himself. After a long day of searching, he found a broken pearl bracelet that looked very similar to his 4-year-old daughter's. He realized it was hers and that she most likely hadn't survived. He burst into tears but didn't give up the search. Soon after, he found his daughter's body. Although she did not survive the crash, her body was intact and unharmed. Vitaly picked her up. All he had to say to the authorities was, she didn't suffer at all, and walked away. 2 days after the crash, most of the families made their way into southern Germany at the crash site. Although they were allowed near the site, they were not permitted to look at the body since they were all deeply charred and torn apart. In an interview with Alina's parents about how they got to know about the incident, her father said, "I was in the kitchen watching the news. When I saw the plane crash on the TV, I didn't think much of it. But when they showed a close-up of our Bashkir Airlines on the rear of the aircraft, I nearly fainted. Everyone else was still asleep. I leaned over to the table to catch myself from falling. I didn't know what to do. Back in Ufa, Both the Christians and the Muslims were in a state of great sorrow. The bodies of the 53 people who died in the Tupelo took up 2 double rows of graves in the cemetery. People wanted answers. Why did the planes run into each other? Who is at fault for this disaster? Who should be held accountable for the loss of so many innocent lives? Some people blamed the Russian pilots for not responding to the repeated warnings given by air traffic control. They were flying at an altitude where they should not have been, whereas others came to their defense saying they were and have always been extremely experienced and professional pilots, and it was most likely not their fault. Some people even blamed the TCAS system, saying that the computer made to save human lives ended up taking them this time, and that it might have been a language barrier due to which the Russians failed to respond to the TCAS request to descend the plane. After this disaster, Peter was chased by the media and was charged with 71 cases of manslaughter due to negligence. A year after the incident, many families came back to the crash site. Among the people present were Sky Guide's head and Vitaly. He asked the head who was the controller of the flight, but got no answer. He decided to fly to Zurich and find out who the person to blame truly was. He discovered it was Peter at flight control that day. Blaming him for what happened to his family, he decided to take his revenge. He located where Peter lived, and on 24th of February 2004, he arrived on Peter's doorstep. He started banging on Peter's door, and as soon as he opened his door, Vitaly stabbed him in the stomach, ending his life, and fled from the scene. He was later found in a hotel where he was taken to an asylum till the doctors confirmed if he was fit for the trial or not. He was found guilty, but left prison soon after and led on to live a normal life. Vitaly now was a completely different man, and in 2016, upon retirement from the local Ossetian government, Vitaly was awarded the highest regional medal by that government, the Medal to the Glory of Ossetia. The medal is awarded for the highest achievements, improving the living conditions of the inhabitants of the region, educating the younger generation, and maintaining law and order. One mistake led to the death of 71 innocent lives, destroyed so many families, and even took the life of the man responsible. This tragedy shows how our actions can have far-reaching effects. Let it remind us to always seek understanding and kindness, even when faced with great loss. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to leave a like and subscribe to the channel for more amazing content. I'll see you in the next one.